Welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Dialogue, where we're here to foster conversations that innovate change. I'm back with my brother Michael Upshaw, founder and CEO of Above the Cloud Media and Marketing. Welcome back, man.
Well, it's good to be back.
Yeah, so we got this dialogue we have going on here. We've talked about a few things back in the days. We talked about gangster rap and rap music and the influence of rap music in our life. And then just trying to survive. You know, when we left off just trying to survive, it's hard to understand like the culture of just trying to survive because there's so many people out there, they gravitate to whatever helps them survive.
Yeah.
And the way they survive. We talked about how you were in the car and got traumatized by this dude that ran from the police, right?
Yeah.
So in that, your trauma pushed you further away from that lifestyle. Some people, they get traumatized, they gravitate toward that because that's how they survive.
Yeah, man.
So, you know, when we start talking about trauma, and we left off talking about trauma, and how the trauma of poverty keeps the trauma of poverty going.
Yeah.
And you know, what we mean by that is the trauma of poverty is something that we all experience, or the trauma period. But poverty brings a separate type of experience when it comes to trauma. That's your environmental trauma, it's your household trauma, it's food desert trauma, food insecurities, housing insecurities, being able to just have hot water every day.
Yeah.
You know, like everybody doesn't have hot water every day.
No.
Everybody doesn't have selection of meals that they can eat, you know, and so with poverty, there's frustrations that are built up in all the people that are around. The child or the person growing up in this may not see the frustrations, but there's so many other frustrations. So when it comes to the trauma of poverty, you know, we got to be mindful of how that impacts people. You know, a lot of times they like to use terms like social determinants of health, you know, and that's what these are the social things that cause us problems, and challenges and everything. So you want to use the technical term, social determinants of health.
Yeah.
And so when we start looking at that, we start thinking about the trauma of poverty and how it keeps the trauma of poverty going. What was your experience about the trauma of poverty in your world?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think when I look at it, poverty itself presents a layer of traumatic experiences based on what you don't have access to, right? So if you're deprived of anything long enough, right, then you take on the concept, even when you start getting access to means that, oh yeah, we can't do that right now. Right. Oh yeah, we can't do that. Because you've almost been trained that it's certain things that you just can't do. And then you have to realize, oh wait, I can do that, right? So something as simple as dental care, right? As you grow up in life, and some people have, you know, insurance, some people don't, some people don't, you know. So if you were raised in a household where you went to the dentist every 6 months and you got, you know, your cleaning and you did all of that, you're gonna be accustomed to that. But if you grew up and that wasn't it, you know, I think one of the first times that I really went to the dentist consistently is when I joined the military. So I didn't even know that you should be going every 6 months, right? I didn't know that because I grew up in an environment where that just wasn't our norm.
So it's interesting. You said the military's when you first started going consistently.
Yeah.
For me, it's prison.
Yeah. Wow.
It was prison. Literally, when I got to prison, I got my teeth cleaned for the first time in years.
Wow.
I just thought my teeth were really jacked up. Right. But they really weren't. It was just they hadn't been cleaned in years.
Yeah.
And so we don't know this. You know, one of the interesting studies that I did while I was doing my degree was on, you know, the different things, the social determinants of health that keep people out of school.
Yeah.
One of the key elements that keeps kids out of school is oral health.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't realize that oral health is one of those determinants of health that cause kids to miss school, which cause their grades to stumble, which cause them by the third grade not to be able to read at their grade level, and literally causes them to enter this school to prison pipeline. And so you can see way back how that trauma causes even oral health care, how it can, you know, cause a child or somebody to enter into a system that they don't really want to be a part of.
Yeah.
And then the insecurities of your oral health.
Yeah.
You know, and what I mean by that is I had jacked up teeth.
Yeah.
So I was pretty insecure. And, you know, because every time I smile, I was like, man, someone's seeing how jacked up my teeth are. You know, and it wasn't that they were jacked up. It's just when I was younger, I fell off my bike, flipped over my handlebars, cracked my front tooth. And so sometimes I had a chipped tooth up front, right? And I had no means to go off and fix that. And
well, to that point, right? So fast forward, you grow up, right? You have kids of your own.
Right.
Our middle son, he was probably, had to be 4 or 5 years old. This is permanent teeth. So whatever that age is where your teeth are actually permanent. He had this toy that he was balancing on his feet, right? And it fell and broke his tooth.
Right.
And I was like, wow, you know, he had to go to a special dentist because he's autistic. Then we had to go to a dentist who didn't use mercury, so it had to be mercury free and all these other things. And so this one tooth ended up costing like $5,000 to fix, right? So, and that's what we covered, right? so I'm still trying to figure out what the insurance covered. But to think about that, where I'm looking at, you know, man, this is our son, $5,000, man, to fix his tooth, right? My mom, I still have that tooth today. Like she should have been like, boy, that's what you get for
you should have been playing like
that.
Right.
And I don't know if that's just poverty mentality. I believe it is, but to that point, we see it all the time, right? Where because of this, you don't have that, therefore you live in this condition. So that's what a poverty mindset does, even if I believe my parents had certain means, but I think the mindset was one thing. And when you're surrounded by that mindset, it's almost like you living in fear of if you know, you're gonna lose your job or, you know, you gotta, so all of these types of things. So as a parent, I wanted to ensure that, man, our kids never had to experience those types of situations or where they felt bad because they did something, it was a mistake or what have you. When we did stuff, it was like, boy, it's your fault if you wouldn't have been doing this. And so never wanted to create that type of environment so that they would feel comfortable coming and saying, man, you know, I broke my finger, right? Not, man, I broke my finger. I don't know what I'm gonna tell my mother.
I don't know if it's
fixed,
just broken. Right? I know it's going the opposite way, but I might have to deal with this.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. We talk about poverty and privilege in our society. And we think about privileged lifestyle because a lot of times people who grow up in privilege, they grow up without these barriers that we have.
Yeah.
These poverty mentality type of things where I don't know if I should say anything because I broke this, you know, what's going to happen? Because things are so valuable, and I'll say even one aspect of it is we tie it to work.
Yeah.
The amount of work that it costs for me to do this is the amount of effort that I put into something, and you broke that.
Right.
And so it's like if we don't have much, everything we have is valuable.
Right.
It isn't like there's something that's way more valuable, even though we have the china cabinet with all the china that you don't touch any of that, right? Yeah. But where'd that come from? How come we can't touch it? But anything else,
plastic furniture, remember
everything. And so it's interesting, like the trauma of poverty keeps the trauma of poverty going.
Yeah.
So when you go to a neighborhood that doesn't look up to par, there's trash all over the place. You get comfortable living in trash. So what do? You go down the street, you eat your Wendy's, you throw it out the window. Why? Because that's the environment I live in. But go to another neighborhood that's not impoverished that way, and you'll never see that.
Right.
And so a lot of times we recreate the environments that we're accustomed to.
Or to that point, you move out of that neighborhood.
Right.
But you take the poverty mentality with you.
Right.
So you move into a neighborhood that's a little bit better, right? Because you want better schools or whatever it is. But then you get there and now you the one throwing the trash out in the yard.
And you're the one with the broke down car
sitting in the driveway. Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's not we're not knocking that kind of stuff, and that's one of the things we want you to get. We're not knocking it. We're just pointing out some of the things, and the way things are is not the way they have to be. But this is the way it is. A lot of times we don't recognize this as trauma or something that has to be addressed because that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
That's keeping it real, and we can't keep it real like that anymore because that realism doesn't work. There has to be a better way. And so when we start thinking about the trauma of poverty, what are some of the things that keep you there? Like, as now that you have some success, and we'll both talk about this, but there's been success in life.
Yeah.
But there's always something that wants to pull you back down into that space. What are some of the things?
Well, I think part of it, and it goes back to what I was saying before, it has to be a shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to shift your mentality. So as we move from different spaces in our life, we make different friends, right? We encounter different people. We start to expand our reach and our borders and learn more about certain things. So, like, for instance, you and I probably have more similar backgrounds together out of our friend group, right, than some of our other friends, right? So they may not have necessarily been involved in some of the same things that you and I were involved in. But if you look at all of us across the board, nobody will probably be able to pick us out and say, man, those are the two,
right there. Right.
But it goes to show that you meet other people who have similar experiences in community, but not similar experiences as far as who they hung out with.
Right.
And so I think it's the same that as we grow up and we get older, those things that tend to try to pull you back are generally those old things, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll use this reference. When I became a man, I put away childish things. You have to let childish things stay put away, right? Because they're always going to present themselves. There's always going to be opportunities. So even when we slip back into a certain mindset, we have to ask ourselves, where does that come from? Right. So some of the traumatic experiences, and you and I talked about this, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit more, is like the triggers, right? Of certain things that will happen, and then it triggers in you, a response, right? And why do you respond that way? It's not because of who you are today. It's because of who you were yesterday, right? Or
fool, don't you know who I am?
Yeah, right. And you have to catch yourself, and then you have to ask yourself, who am I, right? Because I'm not that guy. Right. This is who I am. And so I think when we look at traumatic experiences as it relates to poverty, and I want to make this statement too, poverty is not just lack of money.
Poor.
Right? We have to look at, and you laid it out already, but a lot of times, first we have to look at the mindset. Because there's a lot of people who have money. But are stuck in poverty because of the way that they think. And so I think we have to change our thinking. It's not so much as changing your environment, right? I think that could be a part of it, but you also have to change the way that you move.
Right. Explain that a little bit more, how you move.
So how you move in terms of, how you do business, right? If you are an entrepreneur, but if you're an employee, right? What do you take to work with you? How do how do you interact with people? How do you engage people? Are we quick to kind of tell how this side lives versus how this side lives?
One of the things I want to jump on, like how you move, it's not just about how you make money either. It's, are you volunteering?
Yep.
Are you willing to give of yourself and do certain things? Because a lot of times the old way of moving is it's all about me. Yeah. What can I get? How can I get over? What is this doing for me?
Yeah.
But the reality is, and I think we both have this experience, the more we can give, the more we realize it's doing so much more for me.
Yeah.
It's opening me up to so many other opportunities.
Things you wouldn't have thought of.
It's showing that I have a greater work ethic than I had before.
Yeah.
There's a time on my resume where the most important part of my resume was my serving.
Yeah.
Because it showed how much leadership I was a part of, not necessarily the work I was doing. Now there's a good balance there. Yeah. But that serving opened up the leadership opportunities and the growth opportunities that I had. So how we move, it can't be the same way as the way we always move and everything. We can't let the trauma of poverty or poverty mindset or the way we look at the lack of something keep us in a space. Just because we lack something, that's just the way it is.
Man, yeah, as you say that, right, we talk about this. I'm going to use this term and I'm going to follow it up with a term that I don't know if it's used or not. But we talk about this woke culture, right? I think there's a stuck culture.
A what
Right?
culture?
A stuck culture.
Okay, stuck
right?
culture.
You know, people get stuck in a place where they are afraid to move from.
Right.
Right?
Like the guy with the Jerry curl.
Yeah, like the guy with the Jerry curl. Because think about it. A lot of times, man, for us, let's be plain, success means selling out to a lot of people.
It does.
Right? And then we have to ask ourselves, how do we define success? So when we look at these things, a lot of times we criticize one another for wanting better or wanting to have better. And then we talking about the way we move. If we don't give back, if we don't say, hey, you know, this is why I'm doing what it is that I'm doing, I feel a sense of purpose. It really takes away, in my opinion, from why we move in the way we move, right? If it's just about me, right? Because if I really care about these things, poverty and things like that, then I want to look for areas that I can offer support, lend a hand, volunteer. Right. You know, cash is one way to help. Your time is another way to help, right? And what that time does when you volunteer in different circles and you put your face there, it allows people to see that you actually care and that you engage in a way that says, man, I'm willing to sit down and look you eyeball to eyeball and get to know you and learn your story. And I think those things are important when it comes to how we move. I think how we operate, you know, in humanity really shows the depth of our commitment to the process of helping to overcome poverty.
Yeah. You know, one of the things you just said about selling out, you know, sell out is an easy term to just blame somebody for wanting to do better because I can't.
Yeah.
But selling out is also a true term.
Or you won't.
It's a true term too, though. There are people who sell out whatever it is to move to the next place and forget about where they come from.
Yeah.
A lot of times people don't recognize what other people are doing because it's not done in the light or you're not putting it out there. And then when you do put it out there, people are like looking and bragging about this or that. You can't win for losing.
Yeah.
And so people are going to call you things.
And you can't lose for winning.
You can't lose for winning. That's true. People will call you things, they'll talk about you, they'll make you feel a certain kind of way because you want to do better for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, we see that from all the way from early education, like people in 3rd, 4th grade, my kids in their school, because they want to do better. People are like, man, why you all, you know, and it's like.
Well, think about it. One of the things that we grew up, I think we talked about this a few episodes back in some of the different podcasts, but think about it. If you were smart, you know, you were called a nerd, you know, people picked on you, you were bullied, right? So smart's not cool.
Nah.
And so if smart's not cool, then even if you're smart, you got to play dumb because
That's what I just thought
it's
about.
not cool.
Smart's not cool, but cool's not smart.
Right.
Because like you do things, if you want to be cool, a lot of times you fit into a certain culture, a certain way, and you end up, your outcomes aren't the outcomes that you want.
Right.
And so how can cool be smart? You know, now you can be both. You can balance it.
Well, I think that's the thing. Like, you know, growing up, I tried to be the cool kid who hung around smart people.
Right.
Right. Because I'm going to be honest, like, I am not the sharpest knife in the drawer and probably not even close to that one. Right.
I'm not even a spoon.
Right. Definitely not a fork. Right. So, but I was smart enough to hang out with people who did study, who put in the work. And I learned that I had a different way of doing things, right? And so those are the people that became my friends. And at the end of the day, I thought it was crazy for them to want to be more like me than me to want to be more like them.
Right.
And I really found myself wanting to become that. And in my adult life, I'm thankful because I became those type of people. I started to learn more. Once I figured out what I was interested in, talking about poverty, right? And how you move. Remember in school when you was growing up and they would ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? I ain't had no idea, right? Like we talked yesterday about, you know, becoming, you know, we talked about rap music, right? I was like, man, I could do that, right? And so I wanted to be a rapper. You know, at one point I wanted to be a football player. Right. You know, at another point I wanted to be a lawyer. But I had never seen a lawyer. I just was like, hey, until I watched the
good.
Cosby Show.
Right.
Then I was like, man, it's possible. But the point I'm making is I didn't know what I wanted to be. And even when I grew up and got out on my own, I still didn't know what I wanted to
Right.
be. And I think that it's okay as long as you're willing to explore different things and try things and educate yourself on things that you may have an interest in, and eventually you'll find that. And I think that's part of how we move.
So interesting thing about that. Sounds easier said than done though, especially when you're dealing with the trauma of poverty.
Yeah.
Because we want these things. Like I've asked over 15,000 people, do you want your life to be better? And everybody has said yes. I asked those 15,000 people, do you want your life to be struggling and all these other things? Everybody said no.
Yeah.
So everybody has this desire for a better life inside of them. But how to get there, or the way we try to get there, causes most of our problems.
Yeah.
And so we have to begin to look at, are we actually moving in a way that can help us to get there, or is our poverty now oppressing us? Like we have oppression. Like for example, every time I go on a cruise or go out of the country, I come back in, customs pulls me aside, they search all my stuff. Why? Because 20, 30, almost 30 years ago, I went to prison.
Yeah.
30 years ago. And every single time I go out of the country, I come back in, I got to go through this whole thing with customs, right?
I never had that problem. You know why? Not because I had never been to prison.
You ain't never been to prison.
I don't travel.
Yeah. So when I think about it, that is an oppression that can keep me in that same place of trying to keep me down or remind me or make me angry where I can't function, or all I see is, man, I'm gonna get even with them.
Yeah.
There's this school program for my kids, and they want to sign up dads. I signed up for it. It's like, yeah, you're not the kind of person we're looking for. I'm like, do you know what I do?
Yeah.
Do you know how many people I interact with? Did I engage 150 kids at least every single year for the last 20 years?
Man.
It's like, and that's how I felt, right?
And I'm just learning this, by the way. Like, I didn't even know that happened. Wow.
So when that happened, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna figure this out.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling, but that wants to keep me in that mindset of holding myself back because I'm so stuck on what you said about me.
Well, I think that goes to the point about what we were talking about yesterday, right? We had an incident yesterday. It just so happened that, very much was very similar. It was a gentleman, and I'm calling him a gentleman, but, I guess in today's terms, he would be a Karen. But
men can be Karens too.
Yeah, so we can call them Kens. Maybe that's the term.
Right.
But Thomas and I were out. Obviously, we shooting a podcast. We out taking some photos, and taking photos, and we're in the studio, so we have a parking lot outside, and all of those things. But just so happened that while we're taking these photos, it's a gentleman who parks his car and he gets out and he's walking up to his office space, and he turns and asks, what are you doing? And I answer the question and say, hey, I'm taking photos.
Right.
And then he says, okay, I find it peculiar for you to be taking photos in a parking lot of an office complex. And so my response to him was, you find it peculiar for a photographer to be taking photos? And then his response was, don't get smart with me, I'm gonna call the police. And my response was, call the police. And so, of course, that's exactly what he did.
Right.
He called the police. And, of course, that was frustrating. It made me angry to think that somebody who will deploy the police and weaponize the police as if this is the way to get me to comply or get us to comply with what it is that he wants us to do, which he never asked us not to do anything.
Right.
But just the fact that you have somebody who feels like they have superior some type of superiority over you to be able to tell you what you can do or even intimidate you in a way. And so that takes you back to a place to where, man, how would I have dealt with this before, right? And not to mention, the police showed up. So think about it from this perspective.
3 cars deep.
3 cars deep, right? So think about it from this perspective. And I sat there and listened to him describe on this call when he was describing me, black male, 6'1", 230 pounds, black shirt, just everything that I had on, and I'm listening, and I'm thinking, out of all of this description, the one thing that he can't say is he's doing anything wrong.
Can't say that
Right?
at all.
So the only thing that I could have been possibly doing to disrupt this man's day was be black in a space that he didn't want me to occupy.
Right.
Right? And so, but those are the things that when you break away from a certain mentality, you have to say, man, you know what? Yes, I want to do something about this. But at the same time, when the police showed up, it was an opportunity, at least in my mind, to educate the police that, hey, the fact that you showed up is actually what gives people like this the balls, if you will, to call in the first place.
Right.
Because they know that you're gonna show up, right? And I think about it like this. This is my analogy, right? And I'll stop at this. If a person is missing, it takes 24 hours before you report them missing before they can go and look for them.
Right.
But if you're doing something in a parking lot, taking photos, not breaking any laws, right?
10 minutes.
10 minutes they show up, right?
here.
Because somebody called and gave a description. So think about it. If I was a missing person, I would have still had to be missing for at least 24 hours from the time that you called before they did anything.
Right.
But yet they sent somebody. Fortunately, the police that showed up, I give it to them. I give them credit. They handled things well. They dealt with us appropriately. They didn't, show up, in fact, when they showed up, I flagged them down. I wanted to make sure they didn't miss me. Right. But the point is, these are the things that if they go unchecked, man, it could set you off in a way that takes you back to a place to where, you really do end up doing something that gets you in trouble.
Kind of an interesting spin. At the end of that conversation with the police, they were saying, man, this ain't nothing. Matter of fact, we ain't even gonna go talk to him.
Right.
And I had to say, no, you need to go talk to them.
Good thing you did.
Because what if the guy never thought the police showed up and then we're out there doing something again? In this day and age, we got to worry about what people are going to try to do, what they're going to say and everything else. And that's taken us back to a point where, if you say something to me or if I feel threatened, I have to defend myself. So, if you're going to come out here, you're going to follow through all the way and tell him that there is nothing going on here and educate him on this situation.
Yeah.
Because it can turn into so many other things. But whether or not, how right we were and how wrong he was.
Right.
There's still this idea of trauma.
Yeah.
Because of the history of what we've experienced.
Yeah.
The police come out, we know we're right.
Yeah.
But we just don't know what type of police are going to show up.
Right.
Why do you come 3 cars deep? The first guy who walks up, he's gentle. The second guy walks up like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Do I have to get into the smoke? The third police officer walks up, she's smiling.
Yeah.
And she's like, she knows what's going on here. And she's like, man, I would have diffused this a long time ago.
Yeah.
And she just happened to be a black woman. So it's a big difference on who shows up. And a lot of people who watch this, you may have your own opinion, like, good for you for standing up for your rights and complying with the police. We shouldn't even have to comply in the first place.
Yeah, because
and
they
that's
should
the
never
part
been caught in the first place.
Right. That's the trauma that when we talk about the trauma of poverty, it's not only us that has a poverty mindset. We got to shift the whole poverty mindset of this society, because the guy who called the police, that's his poverty mindset. He has a mindset that thinks that he has right to this space more than we do.
Yeah.
And his inability to rationalize through that keeps people in a certain space. Instead of seeing that there's a value in a person right here, and that's a person, and he's doing his job, and he's working, and he's utilizing what's at his fingertips to do it. He took it to a whole other level where now we have to stop work and deal with this madness. And that type of poverty wants to keep you in that space. But let me say this, because we're getting ready to close out, and I just want to introduce the next topic that we're going to talk about, and then we'll close this out, because this leads to the next topic. We can always talk about the people who try to oppress us.
Yeah.
We can talk about the system of oppression. And it's real. It's what leads to a lot of the poverty mindset and poverty things that we experience. If the oppression of this system didn't exist in America for years and centuries, then a lot of the stuff that we see in communities wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
If there is equality and equity and justice for all, then the justice would be there. We would be able to see all of that. But instead, we see injustice, we see inequality, we see inequity. And that's through our healthcare systems, through the communities that we live in. It's the justice system. It's many different systems that we see this in. And so I'm not negating any of that when I say this, that we are oppressing ourselves as much as the oppressor is. Now, there's a whole lot to unpack right there. So make sure you tune in and join us next week, because we're going to talk about our oppression and how we oppress one another.